Welcome in, everyone. UGA Football Live with JC Shelton. We're here in the day of our Lord, November 5th, 2024, and a night that will shape our country. The CFP rankings are out. The first initial rankings of the season, the first in the 12-team format. It's a doozy, I would say. We'll go through that now, just fresh on everybody's minds. Let me know what you guys think. Georgia comes in at number 3 overall, right? Oregon, Ohio State, the top 2. And we'll talk about that first off because what's that basically telling us is the playoff committee thinks that Ohio State's loss to Oregon on the road by 1 point is better than Georgia's win at Texas by 15 when they were the number 1 team in the country. And Ohio State is just coming off that win over Penn State. Penn State comes in at 6 tonight. Obviously, the committee still loves them. Despite their loss to Ohio State, despite not playing a strong schedule by any means in the Big Ten right now. So that's interesting. That's kind of the first tidbit of interesting information there. They have Miami at 4. Miami still undefeated. I think that is good. They should have lost Virginia Tech. They had a couple games come down to, those official calls and reviews that just were playing out bad. Texas at number 5 there, so Georgia has a win over number 5 team in the country. Tennessee's at number 7, so Georgia has a chance to improve on that record in a couple weeks. And we'll go down to Alabama at number 11. And then as far as Georgia opponents go, you've got Ole Miss sitting there at 16. That's what they are in the AP. And you've got Clemson at 23. And that Clemson win after that performance against Louisville last week looks less appetizing for the playoff committee when it comes to Georgia's slate. I think the first thing we'll say on this is, does this matter right now? Answer's no. Answer's no right now, obviously, right? Because there's still plenty of games left. The races in the Big Ten, the ACC, the SEC really trumps those because the Big Ten, it's looking like it's going to be Ohio State, Oregon. I know Indiana and Ohio State play each other before all said and done. That'll be a big game in that race. Basically, if Oregon, the rest of their slate is pitiful. They're probably going to win every game, probably by 2 touchdowns, I would imagine. So they're probably going to be in. So it's really up to Ohio State or Indiana looking at things right now. And I'm taking Ohio State. Even though Indiana has had a great run, it's really awesome to see them pull things together. And Kurt Cignetti, big fan of his, but they haven't played anybody, right? Triple digits strength of schedule. And I think Ohio State being battle-tested takes care of them at home, by the way. So the SEC race is really trumping all those because there's like a few major players in the others, right? The Big 12 is a little bit different because there is a bunch of teams there in contention, maybe really 3: Iowa State, Colorado, BYU. SMU and Miami are looking like they're going to meet here, depending on what happens, but they're probably pretty sold out there. SEC-wise, man, anything can happen here, and that's what's good for Georgia is not only do you have the number 1 strength of record right now, you have one of the top strength of schedules remaining, right? Because you play Ole Miss on the road. You welcome Tennessee at home. Not only if you win those games, you go to the SEC championship, you also will have the best as far as strength of schedule and strength of record goes in the playoff committee's mind, rather. So that's really important for Georgia into the season, depending on what happens in the SEC, right? Because, barring anything catastrophic next week, you're going to have a chance to really solidify your season against Tennessee. Because you have UMass, of course, Georgia Tech to end the season. So everything's set up perfectly for Georgia to control their destiny. We knew that kind of coming into the game because of how the SEC is shaking out. We knew that Georgia had to win these next 2 games against Ole Miss and Tennessee to get to Atlanta. And then at the end of the day, if that happens, you're playing in Atlanta, which is going to look really good no matter if a win or a loss. Obviously, it wouldn't be great, but a loss, even if you do lose that game, you have the wins over Texas. Alabama, depending on what they do the rest of the season, they have a big matchup against LSU this week. LSU sitting in there. That needs to really save their chances at a CFP berth. And it depends on what Alabama's do. They could find themselves in the top 10. They're sitting at 11, right? So they went out. They're probably going to be in. Everything's setting up for Georgia. I don't think there's anything. I mean, you can argue about the number 3 spot all you want. It doesn't matter right now, right? Because of the SEC race and how that could shake out. And you control your destiny. I mean, that's what you want. I think that's what Kirby Smart and company want, is to be able to answer things on the field, right? We win, we're going to get a great spot and maybe get a bye, right? That'd be perfect. And then if you happen to lose, let's say to Tennessee or Ole Miss, if you lose to both, I have no idea. You're probably out, I would imagine. I don't know. It kind of depends on Georgia and how they look at them and how those losses look. Because you look at it, the committee already likes Ohio State's loss over Oregon more than Georgia's win over Texas. And they like Penn State a lot, even though Penn State hasn't played anybody. It's almost like they're rewarding those. So it makes it really interesting when you think what's going to happen at the end of this season with the SEC and how that's going to make Georgia either look really good or really bad. If they're able to get past this slate, obviously it'll be great. Even think Georgia, let's say they missed the SEC championship. Say a loss to Tennessee or a loss to Ole Miss, maybe not both, but let's say one or the other. There's a real chance, because of what they're ranked now and the strength of schedule they're going to have, that they'll be probably playing the Group of 5 champion and they'll get a bye as in championship week. Now, you're going to have to play in the playoff games and you won't get a bye during that week, but you will get a bye, just be a week earlier. So there's good places for Georgia to be, and obviously it all comes down to what you do on the field. As far as opponent rankings, we touched on them, I believe. We'll go through them again. Texas at 5, Tennessee at 7, Alabama 11, Ole Miss 16, Clemson at 23. In the SEC race, it's Georgia, it's A&M right now, 5-1. Tennessee, not A&M, sorry, they lost to South Carolina. Tennessee, they're at 4-1, right? Georgia leads with 5-1. LSU and Texas, they're at 3-1. Interesting enough, though, Texas, they could find themselves at the end of it still in the race because of that matchup with A&M at the end. That would be a great win for them in the playoff scenario as well. LSU has obviously Bama. We talked about that. They have Oklahoma. Tennessee has UGA and Vandy. And, Vandy's no easy out, folks. I mean, even though, let's say that Tennessee wins this game in Athens, which I don't think is going to happen. I'll go ahead and tell you that right now. They don't win in Athens. And they're pretty one-dimensional on offense when it comes down to it when they play odd fronts. Georgia's defense is playing really, really good up front. It's a problem for Tennessee. And Nico, in big games like that against really good defenses, now he played better last week. I think he was in a very, very tough situation against Kentucky. And I think he answered, so maybe there's some growth there. But against a defense like Georgia, I'm not taking a freshman. But Tennessee, I mean, even if they get past UGA, they have to get past Vandy as well. And that's no easy out. And Vandy, I mean, it's their first time beating Auburn and Alabama in a season since like 1955. Incredible for them, but that's no easy out. Texas has Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, and A&M. And Arkansas's played upset to Tennessee. Kentucky almost played upset to Tennessee last week. They obviously beat Ole Miss. Florida played Georgia tough. They've been playing really everyone tough. Depends on what happens with Lagway. He's probably not going to be back, I guess, for Texas. A&M at the end of the season, which we talked about it. So this race is going to be absolutely incredible. It's really shaping up to be a college football fan's dream. Now, depending on what SEC team you like, could be the opposite. But it's going to be a really, really tight finish, I think. And it's going to be really interesting what happens over the following weeks. Obviously, Georgia, you got 2 to get past. That's where the focus is. Let's get to some Georgia-Florida stuff. We'll start with Carson Beck. Guys, I know you've seen it. I've seen it. Everybody's talking about it. And that's how I know it's not just NFL draft analysts talking about Carson Beck right now. Obviously, the game he had against Florida with the 3 interceptions, Kirby Smart was asked about it. National analysts are giving their 2 cents. You have Buck Bellew coming out, the former Georgia legend, giving his 2 cents. And let's start with that. And we'll get into other things around Florida, and then we'll go on to Ole Miss for a quick preview. Carson Beck, 25 of 40, 309, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. It's his 4th multi-interception game. It's odd because 5 of his 11 interceptions this year, and he threw 6, by the way, in 14 games last year. 5 of his 11 interceptions have come on first down. Now, what does that tell you, folks? And to me, and I'm no quarterback guru, but to me, that sounds like you're pushing it, right? And that sounds like maybe you don't trust certain receivers. Maybe you're pushing it, knowing where you're going to go with the ball before the snap even hits your hands. and kind of just trusting that your arm talent's going to get it there. And we've seen play like that from quarterbacks around the country in the NFL too. It happens, right? You trust your arm. Matthew Stafford, Patty Mahomes, those guys with incredible arms, man, they trust their arm a lot of times. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. Look at Patty Mahomes. I think he's tied for the most interceptions in the NFL this season. He may be a little off that now. Matthew Stafford, he is no saint when it comes to being perfect interception to touchdown ratio. But having it on first down, that tells you that this may be a fixable issue for Carson. And I'm kind of convinced on that the more I've researched and wrote about it, especially this week. Wrote several and looked into depth in both. And it sounds like something that can be fixed. And beyond that, another additive to that it could be fixed was last year we didn't see that from him. And obviously you had a guy like Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, you had Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, who maybe never dropped a pass in a Georgia uniform. If he did, it was only maybe 1-2, I would imagine. Maybe when you don't have those guys, you're kind of working with a different level of talent. We can talk about the guys who were suspended. And one was ultimately dismissed. That absolutely hurt. But you're trusting maybe things before you even get the ball in your hands and trusting your arm after that and not trusting necessarily your receivers. And it all comes on first down. That's very interesting to me. And I think that's something that, and Kirby Smart's already talked about it this week. Basically, here's what Kirby said. We'll say that. 73 plays, Beck had 68 quality decisions. That's what Kirby said about how he can limit Carson Beck's missteps, I should say. He added that he has to avoid the catastrophic mistakes, obviously, right? There's a little bit of coach speak, but he is putting a lot of trust in Beck, and I think he should. I think that's the best avenue. I don't think Gunnar Stockton's ready. I don't think Jaden Rashad is ready. Guys, I know I saw a lot of tweets about that. Listen, he just joined the team a few months ago at this point, right? Like 4 or 5. And additionally, he wasn't perfect at Arizona State by any means at all. In this offense, too, learning an entire offense. I mean, look, you look at like guys like Nate Frazier or even Colby Young when they joined the team. They didn't have a long time to learn the playbook and such, and they had to be ramped up in the offense before they got significant playing time. And that also applies to quarterbacks. So I think Beck is obviously the best option here. Kirby sees that as well. That's why he said it that way. Tend to agree because as far as the 73 plays, 68 quality decisions, because Beck's 12 of his last 14 passes went for 142 yards and 2 touchdowns, 12 completions, 14 attempts. Georgia pulls away, wins by 2 touchdowns. So when you absolutely need him to be clutch, he will. When you absolutely need him to be careful with the ball, he will. The thing about it is eventually, and I know this Georgia staff knows this as well, is that's going to bite you against a really good team, right? It's going to bite you against a team that maybe can expose your defense. That's what happened against Alabama because Alabama offense played the best as it has all season. It has not topped that performance. And Alabama was able to get on Georgia. And despite Carson Beck turning on that clutch gene in the second half and playing like he has in late in games, despite that, because of that early push and picking off Carson Beck 3 times and the offense playing like it did, Alabama's, Georgia was able to come back from that. So you can see something like that happening again, depending. And the defense and Georgia's defense has been put in so many bad situations, and Georgia's 7-1, like that's incredible. It's so many bad situations where Georgia has horrible field position on defense, backed up. They get off the field, get a turnover. They keep pushing on the offensive line all game to where you really can't wear them out because Georgia has the bodies back. They have Michael Williams back. They have Tyron Ingham-Dawkins fully healthy. They have Warren Brinson back healthy and playing well. And now you have Jordan Hall adding to it. Another former 5-star, hurt most of the season. He's getting more snaps. So I think that defensive playing well is really good for Georgia, but eventually something might change if you face a good offense who's having a great day. And especially when we get to the playoff and you're playing offenses outside the country, like an Oregon or, SMU, good grief. Their offense is really good. Ole Miss is one of those, obviously, and we'll get into that in a second. That's kind of concern for Georgia fans, in my opinion. And here's another stat that kind of gives you some leeway as well. Georgia's scoring average in the 4 games where Carson Beck has thrown the 11 interceptions total, 34.8 points per game. It's pretty high. Georgia's scoring average in the 4 games he has not thrown an interception this year, 31.5 points per game. Georgia has to score more points just to keep up with it because the other offense is in good position most of the game because of those interceptions. Just something to leave you with. Carson Beck can make up these mistakes. I absolutely believe it. The challenge is Georgia putting him in the right positions too as well, maybe taking some off his plate with the run game early, maybe until he gets a little bit comfortable with what he's seeing defensively. And, I heard Aaron Murray talk about this. I've heard, Buck Bellew. Here, I'll tell you what Buck Bellew said. Performing at a high level to QB is difficult. A lot of variables, a lot out of the QB control. Carson Beck and 40 times had 2 at-fault interceptions. He's talking about the one that was a tip. Both bad decisions, forcing the ball into tight spots. Probably made 60 good decisions, won by 2 touchdowns. Pretty much echoed Kirby Smart there. So we're saying kind of limit the catastrophic mistakes. Can he do it? And I think my Bobo in the second half helped Carson as well with the play designs, the commitment more to the running game at times with Nate Frazier because he was playing really well. Right after Etienne went out, Georgia just turned to passing. They felt that was their best way to get first downs and to get yardage, points at that time. And I think they went back and looked internally and was like, what do we do to get him comfortable, get his confidence back up? Run the stinking rock. Quarterback's best friend, right? They did that better in the second half, and credit to Mike Bobo there for getting him in a situation to where he was more comfortable and was able to turn on that clutch gene like we talked about. And we'll get into Ole Miss now because this is really pivotal for how Carson Beck, I think, plays the rest of the season, is against this Ole Miss defense. And I've watched Ole Miss play many times this year and obviously didn't know the statistical side of things. But after my research here, it's clear that Ole Miss defensively is really tough. And I know they didn't play great against Kentucky when they had a chance to win right at home and they end up blowing that. And then LSU, they have a lead for most of the game, shoot themselves in the foot again and lose. And they were leading the entire game until losing in overtime. But that defense and it's kind of interesting because you have Kirby Smart, who is focused on mostly high school recruiting, right? Not to Dabo Swinney, not going to touch the transfer portal, not to that level. But, number 1 class in the country last year, has been number 1 class in the country like 4 times. And then you have Lane Kiffin, who's middle of the pack, high school recruiting, but then pulled in a really, really good transfer portal class, mainly on the defensive side of the ball. And several of those guys are among their best players and maybe their best players on defense. And it's worked so far. They put up in offensive, they put up 63 points at Arkansas, and Arkansas is not a defensive juggernaut. I'm not saying that at all, but 694 yards of offense, 230 yards of yak, 8 sacks, 3 tackles for loss on defense. That's just absolute dominance on an SEC team that just beat Tennessee. That's incredible at this point in the season because the SEC has just beat itself up, especially. These teams are really good, and the transfer portal has kind of evened out the talent for most of these guys, like your Vanderbilts and even your Arkansas, being able to take down Tennessee and that type of defense that Tennessee has. They still took them down. So Jackson Dart is going to be the focal point of this conversation, but I'm going to get into some defensive things in a second. But Dart, 28-34, 562, 6 touchdowns, 10 for 47 on the ground. He's playing really good ball. I love his mentality. He's a tough competitor. I don't think he's going to be one of those guys kind of tuck his tail early against Georgia. Now, Georgia's going to try to do their best to do that, but I'm not sure if he has the personality to do that, man. He hits contact and he gets up and he's yelling. He's talking smack. I think that's what type of quarterback in the SEC you want, especially a guy who's asked to do so much in that offense and also carry on the ground sometimes. But mostly, Georgia 52-17 last year, right? So Georgia was able to kind of stop that Lane Kiffin attack and Jackson Dart when they had Quinshawn Judkins and those guys. They had Trey Harris on the outside. They were able to do that last year. That was at home. That was a night in Athens, right? This is at Ole Miss, 3:30 kick, which I think actually benefits Georgia in this case. And Lane Kiffin was kind of pissed about this game not getting a night call, which it would have been an awesome game. But Georgia obviously knows that challenge. Lane Kiffin knows the advantage to have that. It's 3:30 kick. Defense in this Ole Miss, I think, is going to be the pivotal part of the game. Can Georgia, because I think Georgia's going to be able to get off the field against Dart and company at times. They're not going to pass for, they're not going to do 694 yards of offense and pass for 562 against Georgia. They're going to make plays, right? I can see them putting 3 touchdowns up or a little bit more. But defense, can this Ole Miss defense really shut down and play like they have played against Georgia in the offensive line specifically? Because Ole Miss is really good up front. 13.2 points per game, 306 yards allowed per, right? They're number 6 in total defense. They were 42nd last year. And we're talking about the transfer portal additions here. Second in rush defense at 82 yards per game. Is Georgia going to commit to it? Or are they going to say, we're just going to put the ball in Carson Beck's hands, which we've seen more than we ever have this year, right? Or are they going to say, no, actually, we're going to go, body blow for body blow up front and do it that way and maybe limit the turnovers a little bit. And then once we get you loosened up on the inside, we're going to hit your outside. We're going to use the extensions of the run game, which are those short passes to Dominic Lovett and even Ben Urasek and Lawson Lucky, Dylan Bell, those guys. Can we use that to advantage to where we open them up after we go body flow for body blow in the run game and then get Carson Beck comfortable and pass down the field? Could be an option, right? Could be an option. But considering Ole Miss having the number 2 rush defense of the country, they might not want to do it. So we might see more of the same from that offense of putting the ball in the air. As far as the transfers goes that you need to watch out for, cornerback Trey Amos, he's from Bama. Nick Saban dude, leads and pass breakups for Ole Miss, 11. 3 interceptions on the season. Those are good numbers. Defensive line, Walter Nolan, who Georgia really pushed hard for, from A&M, former 5-star. I think he was the number 1 recruit in the country at one time. 29 stops, 3 sacks, and then a familiar name for Georgia fans on the edge, Princely Umanilian from Florida. And I hope I said his name right, but he's from Florida, and I know you guys won't care. Florida transfers over. Kind of a guy who was thought to have kind of an attitude issue. Hasn't been that way with Ole Miss. He's got 7.5 sacks on the season. And then linebacker, maybe their best player on the field. He's just a sophomore. Suntarine Perkins, 27 stops, 9 sacks, 1 interception on the season. That defense is good. They've got a lot of quality players. And this might be one of the best challenges defensively Georgia's faced. We thought it was Texas. Georgia found their way with Texas up front. They were able to get the edge. Can they do it against Ole Miss? That's a big matchup you have to watch. I'm going to be watching specifically. We'll talk more about this later in the week as well. Once I crunch these a little bit more, we'll get some more insight for you guys before the game, of course. That's my biggest matchup. And we'll talk about the offense for Ole Miss more, I think, in the next show. I think that's the best way to do it. Here's another one for you. Number of defenders with at least 20 total quarterback pressures and 3 sacks between these two teams, Ole Miss and Georgia. Ole Miss 6, Georgia 0. Okay? They've got multiple guys who can rush. They live in the backfield, and this is going to be a huge challenge for this offensive line, which having Tate Ratledge back is absolutely huge, right? I don't even think Georgia was going to play him as early as they did against Florida. But, Micah Morris went down for a bit, and then Tate came back in. Michael Morris came back in as well, right, in certain snaps. He wasn't moving great during that game after he went down. I think that was clear on tape. I haven't heard a word about him. Hopefully he's, nearing 100% when they play, or Tate Ratledge is going to have to play a lot more off that, sprained MCL, surgically repaired ankle. All right, so that's the big matchup, and I think Georgia having Ratledge back could be a good thing depending on how good he is as far as his health goes, what percentage he's at. But they're going to be tested. Or are they up for the challenge? It's kind of the big thing we're looking at. And we talked about last year's matchup in Athens, and I think just the defensive team that Ole Miss has put on the field this year makes it a different matchup. And then you have to go on the road in the SEC. I don't think it's going to be an easy game for Georgia at all. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. Been wrong before, but that's what I'm feeling right now. We'll peek at the spread here. Georgia, 2.5-point favorite. 2.5-point favorite, totals 54. Interestingly enough, ESPN Analytics, which uses, strength of schedule, record, opponents, how you beat them, everything. They gave Ole Miss a 53.9% chance at winning this game. What would this be in Athens? Probably floating the other direction. But that's what the analytics say for ESPN. And the feeling you get around this game beyond, really this, Ole Miss is trying to save their season, and they're not going to get back in the SEC championship race most likely, but they can get in the college football playoff with a win over Georgia. So best believe that they're going to show up, and Lane Kiffin's going to have these guys realizing that not only you're going to get a team's best shot, you're going to get a team's best shot that have a lot of talent, that have motivation beyond just playing number 2 Georgia at home. Get the motivation of, hey, we can get to the postseason, baby. We can make the first college football playoff in Ole Miss program history with a win. And then you obviously have to win out, but still, I mean, that's what's going to be on the line. So this is going to be a very, very impressive win for Georgia if they're able to go in like this. Very, very impressive, right? And Georgia will obviously benefit from that. They'll have a game against Tennessee the next week, night game. I hear people calling from blackout. Will Georgia wear black uniforms? I don't think so. I don't think it matters, to be honest. But yeah, that's how it's set up here for Georgia. That is how it's set up. And Kirby Smart and company have some work to do to get prepared for this. We'll talk about it again in our later in the week show. Just stay tuned for that. Hopefully, we'll get Arthur Lynch out from his studies to help us out, talk about this game, because he's played at Ole Miss before. So I want to ask him about what it's like playing in Vaught Hemingway, one of the smaller SEC venues. Hopefully we can get that done for you guys. We'll get it out soon. If you're watching on Twitter, Facebook, UGA Football Live, we're always there. Thanks so much for joining us this season. We're having a great time doing this for you guys and absolutely enjoy the heck out of it. If you're listening where you get your podcast, appreciate that as well, or on YouTube at the Pulse Sports Network. Until later in the week, we'll get you out of here. Thanks, guys.